My wife was away, and I thought repainting her office would be a harmless anniversary surprise. But behind one crooked, heavy mirror, her hidden safe held fake passports, burner phones, and a detailed ledger proving she never married me for love. She married me to strip me down for parts. My name is Harrison Caldwell. I am 68 years old. For 40 years, I made my living with grease permanently stained under my fingernails and the heavy smell of diesel fuel soaked into my work boots. I started out turning wrenches on commercial rigs in a freezing rented garage bay. I worked 12 to 14-hour shifts 6 days a week. Over 4 decades, I built a heavy fleet maintenance company that serviced hundreds of long-haul trucks across the state. I poured my sweat, my blood, and my youth into that business so I could eventually sell it and retire with absolute peace of mind. I know heavy machinery. I know torque and pressure. I know how to spot a microscopic hairline fracture in a solid steel engine block before the whole thing shatters on the highway. I know how things are built, and I know when a foundation is silently rotting from the inside out. But God help me, I never saw the rot spreading through my own home. I had been married to Valerie for 5 years. She was 52 years old. We met at a charity auction organized by a local veterans group. I was a widower who had spent the last decade entirely focused on my business after my first wife passed from a sudden illness. I was lonely, tired, and looking for a quiet chapter to close out my life. Valerie appeared like a breath of fresh air. She was a devout, soft-spoken woman who volunteered at her church and always had a warm smile for everyone she met. She told me she was a widow, too. She claimed her first husband died in a tragic boating accident in the late 90s. She played the part of the fragile, sweet woman who just wanted a safe harbor perfectly. I offered her that harbor. I bought a beautiful, sprawling property in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I paid off her small debts. I gave her a life of complete comfort. I trusted her with my home, my heart, and my twilight years. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. The house felt empty and still. Valerie was supposedly in Sedona, Arizona, attending a week-long women's spiritual retreat sponsored by her church group. Our 5th wedding anniversary was coming up in 2 weeks. Before she left, she casually mentioned how much she disliked the pale yellow paint in her home office. She had pointed to a color swatch in a home design magazine, a deep slate blue called Colorado Gray, and said it would make the room feel much more grounded. I thought I would do something kind. I thought I would be the good husband. I drove down to the local hardware store, bought 2 gallons of Colorado Gray, a stack of canvas drop cloths, and premium rollers. I wanted to have the room completely finished, cleaned, and put back together by the time she walked through the front door on Friday. I started moving her furniture to the center of the room, her desk, her reading chair, her small bookshelves. I covered everything with the heavy canvas drop cloths. The last thing left on the wall was a massive, heavy mirror framed in rustic, reclaimed barn wood. It hung directly behind where her desk usually sat. I grabbed the thick edges of the wood frame and lifted it upward to unhook the heavy gauge wire from the wall mounts. It was incredibly heavy. As I pulled it away, the bottom edge of the frame scraped against the drywall. As a mechanic, my hands are trained to feel for misalignments. I have spent my entire life feeling for vibrations and shifts that normal people ignore. When the mirror cleared the wall, my palm pressed flat against the drywall to steady my balance. The wall moved. It was a microscopic shift, less than 1/4 of an inch. But drywall securely fastened to wooden studs does not move. It does not flex. I set the heavy mirror down on the drop cloth and looked at the blank yellow wall. To the naked eye, it looked perfectly smooth. But when I ran my calloused fingertips along the painted surface, I felt a faint, almost imperceptible seam cut straight through the drywall. Houses settle over time, drywall cracks. But this was too perfect. It was a precise rectangle measuring about 14 inches wide and 10 inches tall. I walked out to my garage and grabbed a thin metal putty knife from my toolbox. I came back up to the office, slid the flat metal edge into the invisible seam, and applied a tiny amount of leverage. There was a soft mechanical click. A section of the drywall swung open on concealed high-tension hinges. I stood there frozen. My breath caught in my throat. Hidden inside the framing of my own house, flush against the wooden studs, was a solid steel wall safe. It was a high-end model with a digital keypad and a biometric thumb scanner. My mind started racing. Why would my sweet church-going wife have a hidden wall safe concealed behind a false panel in her office? If she had expensive jewelry or important family documents, why not put them in the large fireproof safe we shared in the master bedroom closet? Why go through the incredible trouble of cutting into the drywall, installing hidden hinges, and masking the seams with joint compound and paint? You only build a hiding place like this when you have things that cannot see the light of day. I stared at the black digital keypad. I did not have her thumbprint. I only had numbers. I tried the obvious combinations first. I typed in the date of our wedding anniversary. A sharp red light blinked on the panel. Access denied. I typed in her birth date. Another red flash. Access denied. I typed in my own birthday just to be thorough. Red light. I stood there in the quiet office staring at the steel door. I thought about the way her mind worked. I thought about the stories she told me. Then I remembered the one specific day she always talked about with tears in her eyes. The day she claimed her first husband drowned in that terrible boating accident. June 14th, 1998. She had told me that date was carved into her soul. She said it was the darkest hour of her life, the day her entire world stopped turning. I reached out and typed 061498. The keypad beeped twice. A bright green light illuminated the panel. The heavy steel locking bolts retracted with a loud mechanical clunk. The safe door popped open. I pulled the steel door wide. The stale air inside smelled like old paper and cold metal. I expected to find maybe a hidden stash of cash, some private letters, or old sentimental jewelry she could not bring herself to share with me. What I actually found made the blood in my veins run freezing cold. Stacked neatly on the bottom shelf were 4 dark passports. I reached in with trembling fingers and pulled them out. I opened the first one. It was a standard United States passport. The photograph on the identification page showed my wife. It was Valerie. Her familiar smile, her green eyes, her blonde hair. But the name printed clearly next to her face read, Diane Chambers. The birth year listed was 3 years earlier than Valerie's actual age. My stomach plummeted. I opened the second passport. It was Canadian. The photo was slightly different. Her hair was dyed a dark chestnut brown, but the facial structure was unmistakably my wife. The name on the document was Rachel Foster. The third and fourth passports were identical in their deception. Different names, different birth dates, different states of origin, all carrying the face of the woman who slept in my bed every night. My hands were shaking so violently I nearly dropped them. I set the 4 fraudulent identities down on the canvas drop cloth. I reached back into the safe. There was a thick stack of banded $100 bills, easily $30,000 or $40,000 in pure, untraceable cash. Next to the cash was a cheap, prepaid black burner phone. And resting beneath it all was a thick, black, leather-bound ledger. I pulled the ledger out. It felt incredibly heavy in my hands. I opened it to the first page. The pages were filled with Valerie's neat, looping handwriting. It was not a diary. It was not a journal of her private thoughts or church prayers. It was a meticulous clinical balance sheet of my entire life. She had listed the exact payout amount from the sale of my fleet maintenance company. She had listed the precise monthly deposits of my retirement funds. She had written down the account numbers and routing details for my primary checking and savings accounts. But that was not the worst part. I turned the page. The heading at the top read Target 4. My name was written directly underneath it, Harrison Caldwell. Listed right below my name was my net worth calculated down to the decimal point. She had noted my age, my medical history, and my daily routines. Next to my life insurance policy, she had written the payout terms and the exact contestability period clauses. The margins were filled with color-coded notes written in red ink. The notes detailed the legal loopholes required to gain emergency medical power of attorney. She had written down the names of 3 local private physicians who specialized in geriatric cognitive care. Beside one doctor's name, she had drawn a small star and written the word receptive. She was documenting my complete financial and legal vulnerability. She was building a step-by-step blueprint to systematically isolate me, strip away my legal autonomy, and liquidate 40 years of my hard labor into untraceable cash. I fell to my knees on the drop cloth. The smell of the fresh Colorado gray paint in the open can next to me suddenly made me incredibly nauseous. The sweet, devout woman I met at a charity auction did not exist. Valerie did not exist. I had invited a predator into my home. She had sat across from me at the dinner table for 5 years, smiling, holding my hand, praying with me, all while maintaining 4 separate identities and waiting for the optimal moment to destroy me. Target 4. I stared at those 2 words on the lined paper. If I was Target 4, there were 3 men who came before me. 3 men who probably thought they were loved, right up until the moment their bank accounts were drained and their lives were ruined. I was alone in my house, kneeling in front of an open-wall safe, surrounded by the physical evidence of my own impending ruin. I felt completely crippled by the deception. I felt like a fool. But as I stared at the ledger detailing the theft of my life's work, the shock and the heartbreak slowly burned away. It was replaced by a cold, white-hot fury. She thought I was just an old, tired mechanic she could scrap for parts. She thought I was oblivious. But she made one fatal error. She left the house and gave me the time to look behind the walls. I knelt on the canvas dropcloth, holding the heavy black ledger in my hands. The smell of the fresh Colorado gray paint in the open can next to me suddenly made me incredibly nauseous. The sweet, devout woman I met at a charity auction did not exist. I turned the thick pages of the notebook one by one. The crisp white sheets were covered in Valerie's neat, cursive handwriting. It was an inventory of my entire life. She had documented the exact buyout figure I received when I sold my heavy fleet maintenance company. She had listed the routing numbers for my pension deposits. She knew the maturation dates of my certificates of deposit. She had mapped out every single dollar I had earned over 40 years of tearing down diesel engines and rebuilding transmissions. She even listed the estimated auction value of my restored vintage Chevrolet pickup truck sitting in the garage. She recorded my life insurance policy down to the exact contestability period clauses. Every drop of sweat I had ever given to provide for my family was reduced to ink on paper waiting to be stolen. Then I saw the heading at the top of page 42. Target 4, Harrison Caldwell. My breath stopped in my throat. Target 4. That meant there were 3 men before me. 3 lives she had systematically dismantled and consumed. Beneath my name, she had written a psychological profile that read like a predator studying its prey. She called me isolated but resourceful. She noted that I was a proud man who valued independence but craved companionship. But the notes that followed made my blood run absolutely cold. She had drawn a timeline mapping out a highly specific strategy to seize my assets. The heading for the final phase read, Power of Attorney. Underneath that heading, Valerie had detailed a step-by-step plan to manufacture a medical crisis. She had written down a schedule to slowly introduce symptoms of early-onset Alzheimer's disease. I read her notes about documenting fake memory lapses. She wrote about hiding my car keys and then pretending she found them in the refrigerator to make me doubt my own mind. She had written reminders to casually mention to our neighbors and our church friends that my memory was failing. She was laying the groundwork to convince everyone around me that my brain was rotting away. The most chilling part was a checklist for a doctor appointment. She had selected a private concierge physician and written notes on how to present herself as the exhausted, weeping caregiver. She planned to secure a medical declaration of my cognitive incompetence. Once she had that piece of paper, she could activate the emergency power of attorney clause. She had quietly slipped into our estate planning documents last year under the guise of preparing for the future. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I suddenly remembered all the mornings over the past few months where I woke up feeling unnaturally sluggish. The times my vision blurred and my hands felt incredibly heavy. I thought it was just old age catching up with a man who had spent decades breathing exhaust fumes and lifting heavy engine blocks. Now, looking at this ledger, I realized she was actively poisoning me. She was stealing my mind on paper and in reality. I set the black ledger down on the drop cloth and picked up the cheap prepaid burner phone. It felt like a block of ice in my palm. I pressed the power button and the screen lit up. There was no passcode. She was arrogant enough to believe I would never find her hidden safe. I tapped the messaging application and opened the only active text thread on the device. The contact name was saved simply as Jared. Jared was supposed to be Valerie's younger brother. When we were first dating, she told me a tragic story about how their parents had passed away and how she had practically raised him. She said Jared was a good kid who had fallen in with a bad crowd and struggled with severe addiction issues. Over the past 3 years, I had treated Jared like my own family. I paid for his expensive residential rehabilitation program. When he said he was ready to get his life back on track, I paid the security deposit and first 6 months of rent for his apartment. I even bought him a reliable used truck from one of my old fleet connections so he could get to work. I had handed over thousands of dollars out of pure love for my wife because I wanted to ease her burdens. I remembered driving 4 hours in the middle of the night to pick Jared up when he claimed his car broke down on the highway. I remembered Valerie crying on my shoulder, thanking God for sending her such a strong, protective husband. I remembered sitting across from him at Sunday barbecues, listening to him talk about his recovery journey. I started reading the text messages. The very first message I saw shattered the illusion completely. Miss you, babe. Cannot wait to sleep in a real bed with you again. My heart hammered against my ribs. I scrolled up reading message after message. The tone was not a sister talking to her troubled brother. It was deeply romantic and conspiratorial. They talked about the vacations they would take when the job was done. They joked about the money I was giving them. I read a message from Jared complaining about his gambling debts. Valerie had replied telling him to be patient and that the old mechanic was clueless. She promised him that my pension would cover his bookie by the end of the month. Jared was not her brother. He was her partner in this sick game. He might even be her actual husband. Every tear she had shed over his supposed addiction, every late-night phone call where she pretended to comfort him, it was all a calculated performance. They were laughing at me while they drained my bank accounts. I had bought a truck for the man who was sleeping with the woman plotting my demise. The sheer magnitude of their greed made me want to scream, but the silence of the empty house wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. I had to keep reading no matter how much it hurt. I continued to scroll through the message thread, my vision blurring with angry tears. Then I saw a block of text sent just 2 days ago, right before she left for her supposed church retreat in Sedona. The words punched the breath straight out of my lungs. The mechanic's daughter is officially out of the picture. Sent the final text from his phone yesterday. She will never visit again. Next step, the doctor's appointment on the 14th. I dropped the phone onto the hardwood floor. My hands shook so violently I had to press them flat against my thighs to steady myself. Clara. My beautiful, brilliant Clara. She is my only child, the only family I have left in this world. I taught her how to ride her first bicycle in the driveway of our old house. I paid for her college tuition with overtime pay from the garage, working until my hands bled. I walked her down the aisle on her wedding day with tears of pure joy in my eyes. For the last 8 months, the silence between Clara and me had been a heavy, agonizing weight on my soul. Clara had always been my rock, especially after her mother passed. But shortly after I married Valerie, things began to change. Clara stopped coming over for Sunday dinners. She stopped calling me on her drive home from work. When I tried to call her, it always went straight to voicemail. I thought she was just busy with her career in healthcare administration and raising her own young son, Tommy. I thought maybe she resented me for moving on and marrying Valerie. It broke my heart, but I wanted to give her the space she needed. I told myself that a good father knows when to step back. Valerie was always the one comforting me. She would rub my shoulders and tell me that children naturally drift away when they start their own families. She told me to be patient and that she was my family now. She was the one who intercepted my phone when I was in the shower or working in the garage. She told me Clara had called to say she was too busy to visit. Looking at that text message, I realized the bitter silence was completely manufactured. Valerie had orchestrated the entire estrangement. She had stolen my phone, deleted Clara's desperate replies, and crafted cruel fake responses from my number. I could not even fathom the terrible things Valerie must have typed to my daughter to make her stay away entirely. What lies had she told my little girl? She had systematically severed the strongest bond in my life to ensure there was no one left to defend me when the final blow came. She knew Clara was smart enough to notice the financial irregularities and the fake cognitive decline, so she erased my daughter from my life. I pictured Clara sitting in her home, believing her father no longer wanted anything to do with her. I pictured the pain I must have caused her without even knowing it. The sorrow in my chest hardened into something unrecognizable. The despair burned away completely, leaving behind a cold, calculated rage. I am a man who spent his life working with heavy machinery. I know that when a transmission is completely stripped, you do not cry over the broken gears. You take it apart piece by piece and you rebuild it. Valerie thought I was a broken-down old man ready to be shipped off to a care facility. She thought she had cut all my lifelines. She thought I was just a naive target waiting to be slaughtered for my bank accounts. But she made one fatal error. She left the house and gave me the time to look behind the walls. I did not smash the safe. I did not throw the burner phone against the wall. I took a deep breath and let the mechanic inside me take over. I pulled my own smartphone from my pocket and began to photograph everything. Every page of the ledger, every fake passport, every text message between her and Jared. I captured the evidence of my own planned destruction with steady hands. I was going to get my daughter back, and I was going to make sure the woman who tried to destroy us never saw the light of day again. I stared at the black ledger and the prepaid burner phone resting on the canvas drop cloth. Every muscle in my body begged me to take my heavy steel wrench and smash that wall safe into jagged pieces of scrap metal. I wanted to tear the drywall down to the wooden studs. I wanted to rip apart the beautiful home I had built for a woman who was actively plotting to erase my existence. The heat of absolute fury burned behind my eyes, but 40 years of working on massive diesel engines had taught me one undeniable truth. When a heavy machine is failing, critically losing your temper only guarantees you will get crushed under the weight of the steel. You have to shut off the engine, step back, and systematically map out every broken component before you begin the teardown. I forced myself to take a slow, deep breath. I pulled my smartphone from my denim pocket. My hands were trembling so badly I had to grip my wrist with my other hand just to stabilize the camera. I took high-resolution photographs of every single page in Valerie's ledger. I made sure the lighting clearly captured her neat cursive handwriting, documenting the exact routing numbers of my pension and the contestability clauses of my life insurance. I took clear pictures of the 4 fake passports, making sure the distinct names and Valerie's smiling face were perfectly visible. Then I opened the text threads on the burner phone. I took screenshots of every single message between her and Jared, the fake brother who was supposed to be in a drug rehabilitation center. I documented their sick jokes about my money and their calculated plans to send me to a cognitive care facility. When I was absolutely certain I had captured every piece of evidence, I began the agonizing process of reassembly. I stacked the passports exactly as I had found them. I placed the cash, the burner phone, and the heavy black ledger back onto the steel shelf. I closed the heavy safe door and listened to the electronic locking bolt slide into place with a definitive clunk. I pressed the false panel of drywall back over the hidden compartment, feeling for the invisible seams to ensure it was perfectly flush. Then I picked up my paint roller. For the next 4 hours, I painted that office Colorado gray. Every stroke of the roller felt like a physical punishment, but I knew my survival depended on this performance. Valerie needed to come home from her supposed church retreat in Sedona and see exactly what she expected to see. A loving, oblivious, aging husband who had spent his week doing manual labor just to make her smile. I taped off the baseboards. I cut in the corners with a fine brush. I let the smell of the fresh paint mask the scent of the bitter betrayal that was suffocating me. I worked until my shoulders ached and my knees throbbed, making sure the room was absolutely flawless. I hung the heavy rustic mirror right back over the hidden safe, wiping away my fingerprints with a clean rag. By the time I carried the empty paint cans to the garage, the trap was concealed, and my mind was entirely focused on one single objective. I had to fix the deepest fracture in my life. I had to get my daughter back. I washed my hands with abrasive pumice soap scrubbing until my skin was raw, as if I could wash away the filth of Valerie's deception. I grabbed my keys and got into my restored vintage Chevrolet pickup truck. The drive across town to Clara's neighborhood took 45 minutes, but it felt like an absolute eternity. With every mile that passed down the interstate, the agonizing weight in my chest grew heavier. I thought about the last 8 months, the missed Sunday dinners, the phone calls that went straight to voicemail. The cold, empty feeling of believing my only child had simply decided she no longer had room for her old father in her busy life. I missed my grandson Tommy more than words could describe. I missed taking him to the park and buying him ice cream. Valerie had played her part so perfectly during all of this, rubbing my back, pouring my coffee, whispering that Clara was just being selfish and that I needed to focus on the family I had left. She told me to protect my heart from ungrateful children. She was the family that was actually a parasite draining my lifeblood. I pulled into Clara's driveway. Her house was a modest, beautiful place I had helped her and Tommy move into just a few years ago. I sat in the truck for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. I was terrified. I did not know what Valerie had said to her. I did not know how deep the poison had seeped into my daughter's heart. I walked up the concrete path and knocked on the front door. I waited, listening to the muffled sounds inside. The deadbolt clicked and the door opened a few inches. Clara stood there, keeping the security chain engaged across the doorframe. The moment she saw my face, her posture turned completely rigid. She looked exhausted, her eyes guarded and deeply defensive. She did not smile. She did not open the door wider to invite me inside. "What do you want, Dad?" she asked. Her voice was flat, carrying a mixture of exhaustion and deep-seated anger. "Have you come to tell me what a disappointment I am in person this time? Or did Valerie send you to collect the rest of Tommy's old toys so you can finally be rid of us?" The sheer hostility in her voice felt like a physical blow to my stomach. This was my little girl, the child I had protected from every storm, looking at me like I was a monster. "Clara," I said, my voice cracking, "please, you have to let me in. I did not come here to argue. I need you to look at my phone." She crossed her arms, her knuckles turning white as she gripped her own sleeves. "I really do not want to do this today. I am tired of the games. I am tired of the awful things you say to me when nobody else is around to hear it. Just go back to your perfect wife." The tears I had been fighting back all morning finally spilled over my weathered cheeks. I fell to my knees right there on the concrete porch, a proud 68-year-old mechanic weeping openly in the fading afternoon light. "I beg you, Clara," I sobbed, holding my smartphone up to her through the narrow gap in the doorway. "Please look at my phone. Just look at the photographs. I never wrote those things to you. I swear to you on your mother's grave, I never wrote those things to you. I did not know what she was doing to us." Clara froze. The sight of her father, a man who had never shed a tear through decades of broken bones and financial hardships, breaking down on her doorstep, shifted something in her eyes. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then reached out and unlatched the security chain. She opened the door and gently pulled me up by my jacket sleeve, guiding me into the quiet safety of her living room. We sat at her kitchen table. The silence between us was thick and heavy, loaded with months of unspoken grief. Clara pulled her own cell phone from her pocket and set it on the wooden table. "You want to see what you wrote to me?" she asked, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. "You want to see why I stopped coming over and why I kept your grandson away from you?" She opened our text message thread and slid the device across the table. I picked it up, wiping my eyes. I started reading the messages sent from my exact phone number dating back to the spring. The cruelty of the words made me physically sick to my stomach. The first message read, "Clara, I need you to stop dropping by unannounced. Valerie has a lot of anxiety and your constant demands for attention are stressing my marriage." I scrolled down, my stomach churning. Another message sent a few weeks later read, "You are acting completely selfish. Your mother would be deeply ashamed of the way you are trying to drive a wedge between me and my wife. Do not call me until you are ready to apologize to Valerie for your behavior." And then the final message sent just a few days ago, right around the time Valerie claimed she was leaving for her religious retreat. It read, "I am changing my will. You have proven that you only care about my money. Valerie is the only one who actually takes care of me. Consider this my final goodbye. Do not contact me again." I dropped Clara's phone onto the table like it was burning my hands. I looked at my daughter. Her eyes were red and filled with fresh tears. "For 8 months I thought my father hated me," Clara whispered, her voice breaking into a sob. "I thought Valerie had finally convinced you that I was just a greedy, ungrateful child. I tried to call you, but you would never answer. And when you texted me back, it was always this pure venom." I reached across the table and grabbed her hands. I squeezed them tightly, needing her to feel the absolute truth in my grip. "Clara, I never typed a single one of those words," I said fiercely. "Valerie intercepted my phone while I was in the shower or out in the garage or sleeping. She deleted your calls from my call log before I could see them. She manufactured this entire nightmare to isolate me so she could steal everything we have built." I unlocked my own phone and pulled up the photo gallery. I showed Clara the pictures I had taken just hours ago. I showed her the false panel behind the mirror. I showed her the steel safe, the fake passports with Valerie's face, the untraceable cash, and the burner phone texts from Jared laughing about stealing my pension. Finally, I swiped to the photographs of the black ledger. I zoomed in on the page labeled Target 4. I watched Clara's eyes scan the clinical blueprint Valerie had drafted to fake my cognitive decline and seize emergency medical power of attorney. When Clara read the specific note Valerie had written about finalizing the estrangement between us, the color completely drained from her face. She looked from the screen up to my eyes, the magnitude of the betrayal washing over her. "She did not just steal our relationship," Clara said, her voice dropping to an absolute whisper. "She has been trying to erase your mind on paper. She wants to lock you in a care facility and drain your accounts." "Yes," I said quietly. "And the man I bought a truck for, the man we thought was her struggling brother, is her partner. He is waiting for her to get the power of attorney so they can cash out the estate and run." The tears on Clara's face stopped falling. I saw the exact moment the profound grief morphed into something else entirely. She inherited my temper and my fierce resilience. The sadness vanished from her eyes, replaced by a cold, sharpened fury. She sat up straight, wiping her cheeks, her expression hardening into the fierce focus of a woman preparing for war. "She wants to play doctor," Clara said, her tone dripping with venomous clarity. She wants to claim you are losing your mind so she can forge your signature and take everything you worked for. I nodded slowly. She is coming back from her fake retreat on Sunday. She thinks the trap is completely set. She thinks I am a lonely, confused old man who is entirely dependent on her goodwill. Clara leaned across the kitchen table, her gaze locking onto mine with absolute, unwavering intensity. Then we give her exactly what she wants. Clara said, her voice as hard as forged steel. We let her think she is winning. We let her think you are slipping away. But we are going to build a trap of our own, Dad. And when it snaps shut, we are going to make sure she never sees the outside of a federal prison cell. Clara stared at me across her kitchen table. The fierce anger in her eyes over the forged text messages slowly shifted into a clinical, terrifying focus. She works in healthcare administration. She manages complex patient care protocols and understands medical timelines better than anyone I know. She reached across the wooden table and gripped my forearms tight. She asked me to describe exactly how I had been feeling over the last 6 months. I told her about the mornings where my work boots felt like they were made of solid lead. I told her about the heavy fog in my brain, the sudden waves of exhaustion that would hit me before noon, and the way my hands would sometimes shake uncontrollably when I tried to grip a simple wrench in the garage. Clara went absolutely pale. She asked me who prepared my meals. I told her Valerie did everything. Valerie was so devoted she would not even let me pour my own morning coffee. She always brought me a large, dark roast right as I woke up. Clara stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. She told me we were leaving the house immediately. She said the cognitive decline Valerie was documenting in that black ledger was not a coincidence, and it certainly was not Alzheimer's disease. We drove to an independent urgent care clinic 3 towns over. Clara deliberately chose a facility completely outside of our local medical network to ensure Valerie would never see the visit on any shared insurance records. Sitting in that sterile white examination room was one of the most agonizing hours of my entire life. A young doctor came in, took my vitals, and drew 3 vials of blood from my arm. Clara demanded a comprehensive toxicology panel. I sat on the crinkling paper of the exam table feeling like a broken-down commercial truck waiting for a diagnostic read from a computer. I had spent 40 years maintaining heavy diesel engines. I knew what it felt like when a machine was naturally failing from age and mileage. But the lethargy in my bones over these past few months had felt different. It felt unnatural. When the doctor finally returned, his expression was incredibly grim. He held a plastic clipboard tight against his chest. He looked at Clara, and then he looked directly at me. He asked me if I was taking any prescription sleep aids or heavy muscle relaxers. I told him I only took a standard daily vitamin for men my age. The doctor shook his head slowly. He explained that my blood work showed dangerously high, consistent levels of a powerful, unprescribed sedative. It was a chemical compound designed to drastically suppress the central nervous system. In small occasional doses, it causes mild drowsiness. In sustained daily doses for a man my age, it perfectly mimics the early terrifying stages of severe cognitive decline. It forces extreme memory loss, physical tremors, deep confusion, and overwhelming lethargy. The truth crashed into me like a head-on collision on the interstate. Valerie had been poisoning me. For 6 agonizing months, the woman I married had been grinding heavy sedatives into my morning coffee. Every single time she handed me that warm mug with a sweet, loving smile, she was handing me a chemical straitjacket. She would sit across the kitchen island, sipping her own herbal tea, just watching me drink it. She would rub my back when I complained about feeling tired. She would whisper sweet prayers telling me that I just needed to rest and that she would take care of everything. She was intentionally poisoning my physical body so she could legally steal my mind. The betrayal was so absolute and so profoundly evil that it literally took the breath right out of my lungs. Clara held my hand as we walked out of the clinic. Her grip was like iron. We sat in the cab of my vintage truck in the clinic parking lot, and we wept together. But the tears did not last long. We had to make a plan. I told Clara I could not go to the police yet. If I called the authorities right now, Valerie would simply play the victim. She would claim I was confused and had accidentally taken the wrong medication. She had already built a massive paper trail to prove to the world that I was losing my mind. A single toxicology report would not put her behind bars for the rest of her life. We needed undeniable, catastrophic proof of her financial fraud to lock her away forever. And that meant I had to go back to my house and walk right back into the jaws of the predator. Valerie returned from her fake church retreat in Sedona late Sunday afternoon. I heard the tires of her luxury crossover vehicle crunch against the gravel in our driveway. My heart hammered against my ribs like a piston about to crack its cylinder. I was a master mechanic. I knew exactly how to regulate dangerous pressure. I took a deep, slow breath. I buried my absolute rage deep into the darkest corner of my soul, and I forced my face to relax into a vacant, tired mask. The front door opened. Valerie walked in carrying her expensive leather luggage. She looked radiant, refreshed, and perfectly innocent. She dropped her bags and hurried over to me, wrapping her arms around my neck. She smelled like expensive lavender perfume and absolute lies. She asked me how my weekend was, her voice dripping with fake, honeyed concern. I let my shoulders slump forward, playing the part of the broken man. I spoke a little slower than usual, purposely losing my train of thought mid-sentence. I told her I spent most of the time sleeping because I felt so incredibly tired and confused. I watched a flash of pure, wicked satisfaction cross her bright green eyes before she quickly hid it behind a mask of pity. She kissed my rough cheek and told me not to worry about a thing. She said she was home now and she would take care of her sweet husband. It took every single ounce of willpower I possessed not to wrap my calloused hands around her throat right then and there. The true psychological torture began the very next morning. I woke up at 6 o'clock ready to deliver the performance of my life. I shuffled into the kitchen, dragging my feet slightly across the tile floor. Valerie was already standing at the marble counter humming a soft church hymn as she poured hot, dark roast coffee into my favorite ceramic mug. I watched her back, knowing exactly what she had just stirred into the dark liquid. The sheer audacity of her humming a hymn while actively poisoning her husband made my blood boil. She turned around with that bright, loving smile and handed me the mug. She told me to drink up and get my strength back for the day. I took the mug from her hands. The porcelain was warm against my palms. The rich smell of the roasted Colombian beans was meant to mask the bitter, chalky taste of the chemical sedative. I forced my right hand to tremble violently. I let the hot coffee slosh precariously close to the rim, almost spilling onto the floor. Valerie immediately reached out her face, a picture of manufactured worry. She told me to be careful and lamented about how my hands were getting so terribly weak lately. I played the humiliated, confused old man perfectly. I apologized, my voice wavering with fake shame. I told her my feet were freezing and asked her to go fetch my thick wool slippers from the master bedroom closet. As soon as she turned the corner and disappeared down the long hallway, I moved with the swift, silent speed of a man fighting for his very life. I stepped quietly to the sliding glass door. I dumped the entire contents of the poisoned mug deep into the soil of the large potted ficus plant sitting in the corner of the dining room. I left just a few dark drops at the bottom of the mug to stain the ceramic sides. I wiped my mouth and sat back down at the kitchen table. When Valerie returned carrying my wool slippers, I was staring blankly out the window, holding an empty cup. She smiled proudly, completely convinced that her toxic dosage was safely in my system. I spent the entire day acting out the exact symptoms she expected to see in her little black ledger. I complained about severe brain fog. I pretended to forget where I placed my leather wallet. I let her guide me by the arm to the living room armchair and wrap a heavy woven blanket around my shoulders. Every time she looked at me with that fake pity, I reminded myself that I was building an iron trap. I was gathering the strength she thought she was stealing. Without the heavy sedatives clouding my brain, my mind was sharper than it had been in half a year. I felt the mental fog lifting hour by hour, replaced by a pristine, calculating clarity. But the absolute peak of this agonizing performance came when the sun went down. Lying in our marital bed in the pitch-black darkness of the room, the psychological tension was completely suffocating. Valerie lay just 2 feet away from me under the expensive down comforter. I could hear her slow, steady breathing. I could smell her lavender lotion lingering in the air. I was sharing a bed with a predator. I was lying next to a woman who wanted to lock me in a clinical memory care facility so she could steal the legacy I had built with 40 years of broken nails and grease-stained hands. My heart pounded so fiercely I was afraid she would hear it echoing in the quiet room. I lay perfectly still, forcing my chest to rise and fall in a slow, rhythmic pattern of deep, oblivious sleep. Inside the dark room, my mind was racing with a cold, terrifying focus. Valerie thought the poison was working. She thought my foundation was finally crumbling into dust. She believed I was just a tired old fool waiting to be erased from the world. She had absolutely no idea that she was sleeping next to a man who was already measuring the support beams, calculating the structural angles, and preparing to tear her entire world down to the studs. The real mechanic was finally awake, and I was going to strip her life for parts. I told Valerie I was going to the hardware store to look at some new shelving units for the garage. It was a simple, ordinary excuse, perfectly in line with the boring, harmless husband she believed me to be. She kissed my cheek and told me to take my time, reminding me to drink a bottle of water because of my supposed fatigue. I smiled my blank, compliant smile and walked out the front door. I climbed into my restored vintage Chevrolet pickup truck and drove exactly 3 blocks before I pulled over into an empty grocery store parking lot. Clara was already there waiting for me in her silver sedan. I locked my truck and climbed into the passenger seat of her car. We did not say a word to each other. Clara just squeezed my hand firmly, shifted the car into drive, and took us straight into the heart of the city financial district. We were not going to the police station. As Clara had correctly pointed out the night before, the police could not arrest a woman simply for keeping a hidden safe and writing a sinister to-do list in a black notebook. Valerie had not actually committed a violent crime yet. She was operating entirely within the gray shadows of family law and medical bureaucracy. To fight a monster who uses legal loopholes as a weapon, you do not call a police officer. You call a bigger, louder, and far more vicious lawyer. Clara had used her extensive connections in healthcare administration to secure an emergency morning appointment with a man named Mitchell Grant. Mitchell was a high-stakes financial fraud attorney who specialized in international asset recovery and complex elder abuse syndicates. He was not a man who handled simple divorces or neighborhood property disputes. He was a corporate shark, a man who dismantled fraudulent companies and corrupt executives for a living. His office sat on the 32nd floor of a massive glass and steel skyscraper. The room smelled of expensive leather-polished mahogany and absolute power. Mitchell was in his late 50s with sharp graying hair and eyes that looked like they could cut through solid steel. He did not offer us warm, comforting platitudes. He sat behind his massive desk, folded his hands together, and asked us to lay out exactly what we had found. I placed my smartphone on his desk and opened the digital photo album. I showed him the high-resolution pictures I had taken of the secret wall safe. I swiped through the images of the 4 fake passports bearing Valerie's face under 4 different names. I showed him the stacks of untraceable cash. Then I pulled up the photographs of the heavy black ledger. I watched Mitchell's eyes scan the page labeled Target 4. I watched him read the clinical step-by-step blueprint Valerie had written, detailing her plan to diagnose me with early-onset cognitive decline. Mitchell's face did not register shock. It registered a cold clinical recognition. He leaned back in his leather chair and let out a slow, heavy breath. He looked at me with a gaze of profound gravity. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice low and steady, "you are dealing with a highly sophisticated professional predator. This is not a woman looking for a quick payout from a joint checking account. This is a Black Widow operation. She targets older, wealthy, isolated men. She marries them, builds a foundation of absolute trust, and then systematically strips them of their legal autonomy. By the time her victims realize what is happening, they are legally trapped in a medical facility and completely powerless to stop her from liquidating their entire life." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I asked him how she could possibly take everything I owned just by pretending my memory was fading. Mitchell leaned forward and pointed at the photograph of the ledger. "Because of the emergency medical power of attorney, she is trying to trick you into signing," he explained. "You spent 40 years building a multi-million-dollar heavy fleet maintenance company. You sold that business and placed the buyout money, your pension, and your investments into standard revocable living trusts and personal brokerage accounts. Your total net worth is roughly $12 million. Right now, you control all of it. But if Valerie secures a sworn medical affidavit from a physician stating that you are cognitively impaired, she can activate the emergency power of attorney." Mitchell paused, letting the agonizing reality of the situation sink in before continuing. "The moment that doctor signs the paper declaring you incompetent, Valerie becomes your sole legal guardian. She will have the absolute authority to sign your name on any document. She can legally sell your house. She can liquidate your $12 million investment portfolio. She can empty your pension accounts and wire every single cent into offshore shell companies using her fake identities. And because the court will view her as your devoted wife acting in your best interest, no bank will stop her. You will be left with absolutely nothing, and nobody will believe a word you say because you will officially be a dementia patient on record." Clara gasped quietly, covering her mouth with her hand. I felt the air leave my lungs. 40 years of tearing down diesel engines, 40 years of breathing grease and lifting heavy steel blocks, 40 years of providing for my family was about to be erased by a single doctor's signature. $12 million of my sweat and blood was going to be funneled to a woman who despised me and a fake brother who laughed at my generosity. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice hard and resolute. I am not going to let her take a single penny from my daughter. Tell me how we tear her engine apart." Mitchell finally smiled. It was a terrifying, calculating smile. He opened a thick manila folder on his desk and pulled out a stack of blank legal documents. "We do not stop her from trying to steal the car," Mitchell said, slipping into a metaphor he knew a mechanic would appreciate. "We just pull the engine out of the car before she gets behind the wheel. We are going to execute a maneuver called a phantom trust." Mitchell explained the strategy with the precision of a military general planning an ambush. Right now, my $12 million was sitting in accounts that Valerie knew about and had full access to monitor. If we suddenly moved all the money, she would immediately realize I had discovered her plot. She would panic, destroy the evidence in the safe, disappear into the wind using one of her alternate identities, and we would never be able to bring her to justice. We needed her to stay confident. We needed her to believe the money was still sitting right there waiting for her to grab it. To do this, Mitchell and his team of forensic accountants were going to secretly restructure my entire estate today. We were going to create a brand new irrevocable trust. Unlike my current setup, an irrevocable trust cannot be altered, modified, or drained by anyone holding a standard power of attorney. I was going to name my daughter Clara as the sole co-trustee. We would quietly move the entirety of my real wealth, the business buyout funds, the pension, the property deeds, and the heavy investment portfolios into this new, heavily armored legal vault. Once the money was inside, it belonged to the trust, not to Harrison Caldwell as an individual. Therefore, Valerie's fake medical guardianship would have absolutely no legal jurisdiction over it. But what about the accounts Valerie is watching? Clara asked, her brow furrowed in concentration. Won't she see the balances drop to zero and know we are onto her? That is the beautiful part of the Phantom Trust, Mitchell replied, his eyes gleaming. We are not leaving the original accounts empty. We are leaving them full of ghosts. Mitchell explained that his financial team would work with my banks to set up mirror accounts. These dummy accounts would digitally display my original $12 million balance on any standard online banking portal Valerie might be secretly monitoring. The numbers would look completely real to her, but the accounts would be entirely restricted and permanently frozen by a federal banking tripwire. The moment Valerie attempted to use her fraudulent power of attorney to wire those funds to an outside or offshore account, the system would not process the money. Instead, it would instantly flag the transaction as a massive federal wire fraud attempt and immediately alert the authorities. We are going to let her walk right into the bank and hand the teller a signed confession, Mitchell said. She thinks she is building a cage for you, Mr. Caldwell, but we are actually building a federal penitentiary cell for her. She is going to lock the door herself. The brilliant, sheer perfection of the legal trap left me absolutely speechless for a moment. It was a flawless mechanism. We were going to let Valerie exhaust herself digging a gold mine that was actually a bottomless pit. She would spend her time and her resources bribing doctors and forging documents only to trigger her own catastrophic downfall the second she reached for the prize. I looked at Clara. My brave, beautiful daughter looked back at me and nodded. We were completely united in this fight. I will sign whatever you need me to sign, Mitchell, I said, rolling up my sleeves. Move the money, protect my daughter, build the trap. For the next 2 hours, I sat in that quiet mahogany office and signed my name dozens of times. I legally transferred the fruits of my entire life labor into the irrevocable trust, protecting it forever from the woman who sought to steal it. Clara signed her name right beside mine, accepting her role as the guardian of our family legacy. The relief that washed over me was profound. My $12 million was safe. My daughter was safe. Now all that remained was catching the predators in the act. As we finished the final pages of the trust documents, Mitchell stood up and walked over to a small locked cabinet in the corner of his office. He unlocked it and pulled out a small velvet jewelry box. He brought it back to the desk and opened it in front of me. Restructuring the money secures your assets, Mitchell said, sitting back down. But if we want to guarantee that Valerie and her fake brother Jared spend the next 20 years in a federal prison, we need undeniable criminal evidence of their conspiracy. We need to catch them discussing the fraud. And more importantly, we need to catch the doctor who is willing to sign a fake dementia diagnosis for a bribe. He reached into the velvet box and pulled out a simple, elegant silver tie clip. It looked like a standard piece of men's formal jewelry, the kind I occasionally wore to church on Sunday mornings. This is not a piece of jewelry, Mitchell explained, handing it to me. This is a state-of-the-art micro-recording device utilized by corporate espionage investigators. The microphone is built into the textured ridge of the silver. It has a continuous recording battery life of 48 hours. It captures crystal clear, high-definition audio within a 30-foot radius, even through light clothing or inside a pocket. I held the tiny silver clip in the palm of my large, calloused hand. It felt incredibly light, but I knew it was the heaviest weapon I had ever wielded. "Valerie has scheduled a doctor appointment for you next Friday." Mitchell continued, his voice dropping into a serious, commanding tone. "She thinks she is taking you there to get the official cognitive decline diagnosis she needs to seize your life. I need you to wear this tie clip to that appointment. I need you to play the role of the confused, fading old man perfectly. You must let her and this corrupt physician do all the talking. Let them discuss your supposed symptoms. Let the doctor make his fake diagnosis out loud. If we capture a licensed medical professional participating in this fraud, the federal prosecutors will have enough leverage to destroy their entire network." I stared at the silver tie clip. The thought of going back into that house playing the pathetic victim and letting my wife parade me around like a broken toy made my stomach turn. I had spent my life being a strong, capable man. Pretending to be weak, pretending to lose my mind was going to be the most agonizing and humiliating performance of my existence. But I thought about the 4 fake passports hidden in the wall safe. I thought about the cruel messages she had sent to Clara from my phone. I thought about the 3 other men on that ledger list who did not have a daughter to help them fight back. Those men had lost everything because they did not see the rot in the foundation until the roof caved in. I was not going to be a victim. I was going to be the reckoning. "I will wear the wire," I said, slipping the silver tie clip into the breast pocket of my jacket. "I will give her the best performance she has ever seen." Mitchell smiled and shook my hand firmly. Clara stood up and wrapped her arms around my neck, burying her face in my shoulder. I held my daughter tight, feeling the absolute strength of our bond. Valerie had tried to erase Clara from my life, but she had only succeeded in bringing us closer together than ever before. We left the high-rise building and stepped back out into the bustling city streets. The cold afternoon air filled my lungs. I knew the coming days were going to be a psychological nightmare. I had to go back to my house, look the devil in the eyes, and smile while she poured poison into my coffee. But I was no longer an isolated target waiting to be dismantled. I was a master mechanic armed with the perfect tools, and I was ready to tear her entire world apart. Sunday morning arrived with a clear blue sky and the crisp air of early autumn. It was the kind of perfect weather that used to make me feel grateful for the life I had built. I would normally spend a day like this out in the driveway, shining up the chrome on my vintage Chevrolet or smoking a beef brisket on the back patio. But on this particular Sunday, the beautiful weather felt like a cruel joke. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, staring at the deep lines on my weathered face. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out the small silver tie clip Mitchell had given me. It looked completely ordinary, but I knew it held the power to tear down the walls of the prison my wife was trying to build around me. I clipped it securely to the front of my collared shirt, right over my sternum. I took a slow, deep breath, locking my blazing anger away in a heavy iron box deep inside my chest. Today, I had to play the role of the broken, failing old man. I had to feed the predators exactly what they wanted to eat. I heard the heavy crunch of gravel in the driveway. I looked out the window and saw a dark gray Ford Silverado pulling up toward the house. My stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. I had bought that truck brand new off the dealership lot just 8 months ago. I paid cash for it using the money I earned from 40 years of rebuilding shattered diesel transmissions. I handed the keys to a man named Jared because Valerie told me her younger brother desperately needed a reliable vehicle to get to his new job after finishing his rehabilitation program. Watching him step out of that truck wearing a smug, confident grin made my calloused hands curl into tight fists. Jared was not her troubled younger brother. He was her partner in a massive criminal conspiracy, and I had personally financed his comfortable lifestyle. I forced my hands to relax. I let my shoulders slump forward, adopting the posture of a man carrying a heavy, invisible weight. I walked slowly down the stairs, dragging my boots slightly against the hardwood floors. When I reached the backyard patio, Valerie was already pouring Jared a tall glass of iced tea. She was wearing a bright floral sundress, looking like the absolute picture of a devoted, loving wife welcoming her family home. She smiled when she saw me and hurried over, wrapping her arm around my waist to steady me as if I were too weak to stand on my own. "Look who is here, sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with artificial honey. "Jared drove all the way out here just to spend the afternoon with us. Are you feeling up to grilling those steaks, or do you need me to do it for you today?" I looked at Jared. He was in his early 40s with slick dark hair and a lazy, relaxed posture. He reached out and shook my hand. His grip was weak. He did not have the hands of a working man. He had the soft, smooth hands of a thief. "I can manage the grill," I said, letting my voice waver and crack just a little bit. "It is good to see you, Jared. I am glad that truck is running well for you." Jared smirked, taking a long sip of his iced tea. "Runs like an absolute dream, Harrison. I cannot thank you enough for helping me get back on my feet. You have been like a father to me." The pure, unadulterated evil of that statement nearly made me break my character. He was looking me right in the eyes, mocking my generosity to my face. I nodded slowly, playing the confused, naive benefactor. I walked over to the stainless steel gas grill and began my agonizing performance. I picked up the heavy metal tongs and stared down at the raw steaks. I deliberately let my hands shake. I stood there for nearly 2 full minutes, just staring blankly at the unlit burners, pretending I had completely forgotten how to operate a piece of equipment I had used 1,000 times before. I reached up and rubbed my forehead, acting extremely agitated and lost. "Jared," I called out, my voice trembling with manufactured panic. "Jared, could you come over here for a second? I cannot seem to remember where I put the ignition lighter. My brain is just full of thick fog today. I cannot think straight." Valerie rushed over immediately, gently prying the tongs out of my shaking hands. "Oh, Harrison, honey," she cooed, rubbing my back. "You do not need a lighter for this grill. It has an automatic ignition switch. We talked about this last week, remember? You are just having another one of your bad days. Why do you not go sit down and let Jared handle the cooking?" I let out a loud, pathetic sigh, dropping my head in fake defeat. "I am sorry," I muttered, shuffling over to the patio chair. "I just feel like my mind is slipping right through my fingers lately. I cannot hold on to my thoughts. I am so lucky I have you, Valerie. I am so lucky I have family here to watch out for me." I looked up at Jared and delivered the bait. "You know, Jared, I was looking at my pension statements the other day. I get so confused looking at all those numbers now, but I want to make sure you are taken care of. I want to set up a larger support fund for you. You are a good man, and I want to share my blessings before my memory gets any worse." I watched the overwhelming greed flare up in Jared's dark eyes. He could not hide it. It was like dropping a piece of raw meat in front of a starving wolf. He glanced at Valerie, sharing a quick, secretive look of pure triumph. They thought I was a wounded, bleeding animal, practically begging them to put me out of my misery. "I really appreciate that, Harrison," Jared said, stepping up to the grill and flashing a wicked smile. "You just focus on resting. Valerie and I will make sure everything is handled exactly the way it needs to be." I sat in that patio chair for another 20 minutes, enduring their fake sympathy and condescending smiles. I waited until the steaks were sizzling on the grates. Then I initiated the second phase of the trap. I let my head loll back against the chair and let out a sharp groan. I brought my hand to my chest, breathing heavily. "I feel incredibly dizzy," I said, slurring my words slightly. "The heat out here is just too much for me today. My hands are completely numb. I think I need to go inside and lie down in the dark for a while." Valerie was by my side in an instant. "Of course, sweetheart," she said, helping me stand up. "You just go upstairs and rest. We will save you a plate for later. Do not worry about us." I nodded weakly and shuffled through the sliding glass doors into the cool, air-conditioned kitchen. I walked over to the large marble island in the center of the room. I took off my light jacket and draped it over one of the tall bar stools. With a swift practice motion, I unclipped the silver tie device from my shirt. I slid it right underneath the edge of a decorative wooden fruit bowl sitting in the middle of the island. The tiny microphone was perfectly positioned to capture every single sound in the kitchen and the adjoining living room. I left the kitchen and walked heavily up the wooden stairs, making sure they could hear my slow, retreating footsteps. I went into the master bedroom, closed the heavy oak door, and locked it. The wait was pure psychological torture. I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the clock on the nightstand. I knew the 2 predators were right downstairs in the house I had paid for drinking the iced tea I had bought, plotting to erase my existence. I listened to the muffled sounds of the sliding glass door opening and closing. I heard the faint hum of their voices drifting up through the floorboards. I sat in that quiet room for nearly 2 hours, fighting the urge to march down there and tear them apart with my bare hands. I had to trust the silver clip. I had to trust the trap. Finally, I heard the heavy front door open and close. I heard the deep rumble of the diesel engine starting in the driveway. I walked over to the window and watched Jared drive away in my truck. I waited another 10 minutes to ensure Valerie was occupied. I heard the water running in the downstairs guest bathroom. I moved quickly and silently down the stairs. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed my jacket, and retrieved the silver tie clip from beneath the wooden fruit bowl. I slipped it into my pocket and went straight into my private home office, locking the door behind me. I sat down at my desk and plugged the micro recording device into the secure encrypted laptop Mitchell had provided me. I put on a pair of noise-canceling headphones. My hands were sweating. I opened the audio file and pressed play. For the first 20 minutes, there was only the sound of sizzling meat and casual patio conversation. Then I heard the sound of the sliding glass door closing. They had moved inside to the kitchen. The audio captured a heavy sigh followed by the unmistakable sound of a long, wet, romantic kiss. The noise made my stomach violently churn. God, I hate playing the grateful little charity case. Jared's voice came through the headphones, stripped completely of his polite Southern boy charm. He sounded harsh, aggressive, and incredibly impatient. I am sick of coming over here and pretending to care about his rambling stories, Valerie. When are we going to finish this? My guys in Atlantic City are getting seriously angry. I owe them another $60,000 by the end of the month, and they do not care about my excuses anymore. They are threatening to send someone to my apartment. I heard the clinking of ice cubes in a glass. Valerie laughed, a cold, dismissive sound that sent a chill straight down my spine. Relax, darling, Valerie said, her voice low and calculating. You do not need to worry about the guys in Atlantic City. I wired another $25,000 to your offshore account yesterday afternoon. I skimmed it directly from his heavy fleet commercial pension fund. I routed it through the shell company just like the last 3 payments. You can transfer it to the bookies in Jersey by tomorrow morning. I hit the pause button on the laptop. My vision actually went black around the edges for a second. Valerie was not just stealing my money to buy designer clothes or fund her secret double life. She was systematically siphoning my protected commercial pension funds and wiring them across state lines to pay off illegal mob gambling debts in Atlantic City. Mitchell, the lawyer, had warned me about this. Stealing money from a joint checking account is a local civil dispute. But routing stolen pension funds across state borders to fund illicit gambling operations is a massive federal crime. It is a direct violation of the Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act. It is federal wire fraud. With that single sentence, Valerie had just handed me the exact key needed to lock her in a federal penitentiary for decades. I pressed play again, my heart hammering with a fierce, triumphant rhythm. $25,000 is not enough, Jared snapped. I need the big payout, Valerie. I need the buyout money. You promised me we would have millions by Christmas. You promised me we would be out of this miserable town and sitting on a beach. I am tired of waiting for the old mechanic to drop dead. I heard the sound of Valerie walking across the kitchen tile. I heard her wrap her arms around him. We do not have to wait for him to die, Jared, she purred. You saw him at the grill today. He is completely falling apart. The sedatives are working perfectly. His brain is turning into absolute mush. You just need to hold on until Friday. Friday, Jared asked, his voice laced with greedy anticipation. What happens on Friday? Friday is the end of the line, Valerie said, her tone dripping with pure malicious victory. I am taking him to see Dr. Evans. I already deposited $50,000 into the doctor's private account. Dr. Evans is completely in my pocket. He is going to run a fake cognitive exam, and he is going to sign the official medical affidavit declaring Harrison legally incompetent due to advanced dementia. I gripped the edge of my desk so hard the wood groaned under the pressure. She was laying out the entire criminal conspiracy in crystal clear, high-definition audio. As soon as Evans signs those dementia papers, Valerie continued, I am activating the emergency power of attorney. I will have absolute legal authority over his entire $12 million estate by Friday evening. I sign the irrevocable transfer forms, we liquidate the brokerage accounts, and we leave the old man rotting in a run-down state care facility while we fly out of the country. He will never even understand what happened to him. The recording captured Jared laughing. It was a cruel, ugly sound echoing through my kitchen. You are an absolute genius, babe, Jared said. The old fool actually thought he was setting up a fund for me today. He practically begged us to take his money. He is a pathetic, trusting idiot, Valerie replied coldly. And by Friday night, we will own every single thing he ever built. I stopped the recording and pulled the headphones off my ears. The silence in my office was deafening. I sat in my leather chair staring at the digital audio wave on the laptop screen. I had it. I had the undeniable, catastrophic proof of their entire criminal syndicate. I had the admission of the poisoning. I had the evidence of the bribed medical professional. And I had the verbal confirmation of the federal wire fraud scheme crossing state lines. Valerie thought she was a master manipulator playing a complex game of chess against a blind opponent. She thought she had stripped all my gears and cut all my brake lines. She believed Friday was going to be the day she finally drove me off the cliff and claimed her prize. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver tie clip, turning it over in the dim light of my office. She had absolutely no idea that the money she was planning to steal on Friday no longer existed. She did not know that Claire and I had already moved the $12 million into an impenetrable fortress. She did not know she was about to walk into a federal trap designed by a ruthless prosecutor. I smiled a hard, cold mechanic smile in the empty room. Friday was not going to be the day she stole my life. Friday was the day I was going to let her sign her own spectacular ruin. Friday morning arrived heavy and overcast, the sky the color of dull lead. I woke up with my heart hammering against my ribs, a steady, violent rhythm that reminded me of a heavy diesel engine struggling to turn over. Today was the day. Today was the climax of a nightmare I had been living wide awake. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at my hands. These hands had spent 4 decades gripping steel wrenches, rebuilding shattered transmissions, and pulling my family out of poverty through sheer relentless willpower. Now I had to use them to play the role of a pathetic, broken-down old man. Valerie walked into the bedroom humming a cheerful tune. She handed me a steaming mug of dark roast coffee. I knew exactly what was inside it. I knew she had ground up the heavy sedatives and mixed them into the brew, fully expecting me to drink my own mental execution. I gave her a weak, vacant smile. I thanked her, my voice trembling perfectly on command. The moment she turned around to walk into the walk-in closet, I moved with a speed I had not shown in months. I dumped the burning liquid into the master bathroom sink, rinsed the porcelain basin clean, and left just enough coffee at the bottom of the mug to make it look empty. I wiped my mouth and shuffled back to the bed. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the small silver tie clip Mitchell had given me. I secured it firmly to my collar right over my sternum. The micro-recording device was fully charged and active. I was wearing a wire, and I was going to capture every single lie these monsters told. The drive to the medical clinic was suffocating. Valerie gripped the steering wheel of her luxury crossover with white knuckles. She was practically vibrating with nervous energy. She thought she was driving me to my final resting place. I sat in the passenger seat staring out the window at the passing city streets. I let my jaw go slack. I kept my gaze unfocused and distant. I did not say a single word. Inside my chest, a furnace of righteous fury was burning so hot I thought it might melt my ribs, but I kept the fire contained. A master mechanic knows that if you let the pressure release too early, you blow the entire gasket. You have to hold the line until the absolute breaking point. We arrived at a sleek, modern medical building on the wealthiest side of town. This was not a regular hospital. It was a private, high-end concierge clinic. The floors were polished marble. Soft acoustic jazz played through hidden ceiling speakers. The air smelled of expensive citrus air fresheners, a sharp contrast to the smell of motor oil and sawdust I had known my entire life. We walked up to the mahogany reception desk. Valerie held my arm tightly, guiding me forward as if I were a lost child. I dragged my boots across the pristine floor, playing my part to absolute perfection. The receptionist smiled warmly and told us Dr. Evans was expecting us. We were ushered into a massive corner office. Dr. Evans was sitting behind a thick glass desk. He was a man in his late 40s wearing a tailored suit under a spotless white lab coat. He had perfectly styled hair and the smooth, practiced smile of a man who sold expensive reassurances to desperate people. But I knew the truth about him. I knew he was a corrupt, greedy fraud who was willing to sell a man's freedom for a pile of offshore cash. Dr. Evans stood up and shook my hand. His grip was soft. He asked me how I was feeling today. I gave him the performance of a lifetime. I looked down at my shoes, furrowed my brow, and started to stutter. I told him I was feeling terribly lost lately. I claimed I could not remember the names of my old employees or where I parked my truck. I let my hands shake violently in my lap. I acted like a man terrified of his own fading mind. Valerie immediately jumped into her routine. She sat beside me, dabbing her completely dry eyes with a tissue. She put on a masterful show of exhaustion and despair. She told Dr. Evans how difficult the past few months had been. She claimed I was wandering the house at night, leaving the gas stove turned on and forgetting who she was. She painted a picture of a devoted, heartbroken wife who was buckling under the impossible weight of caring for a severely impaired husband. Dr. Evans nodded with deep manufactured sympathy. He jotted down fake notes on his clipboard. He looked at me with cold, dead eyes and told me not to worry, that they were going to get to the bottom of this. He pressed a button on his desk phone and summoned a young nurse into the office. He instructed the nurse to take me down the hall to a secondary examination room to conduct a standardized cognitive evaluation. This was exactly what Mitchell told us would happen. I stood up slowly, pretending to lose my balance for a second. Valerie grabbed my arm, her grip digging painfully into my bicep. She told me to be a good boy and go with the nurse. I shuffled out of the office, leaving my wife and the corrupt doctor alone. My silver tie clip was capturing every breath, every rustle of paper, every single word they spoke in my absence. As I followed the nurse down the long, brightly lit corridor, I glanced toward the front reception area. Standing by the main entrance was a woman wearing a dark blue polo shirt embroidered with the logo of a national medical supply distributor. She held a digital clipboard and was speaking confidently to the office manager. She wore dark-framed glasses and had her hair pulled back into a tight professional bun. It was Clara. My fierce, brilliant daughter had walked right into the middle of the lion's den. She caught my eye for a fraction of a second. She did not smile. She did not nod. But the fierce, blazing determination in her gaze hit me like a jolt of electricity. I kept my head down and continued shuffling my feet, hiding the massive swell of pride rising in my chest. Clara was executing the most dangerous part of our counterattack. The nurse led me into a small, sterile room. She handed me a piece of paper and asked me to draw the face of a clock, placing the hands at 10 minutes past 11. As I picked up the pen and deliberately began to draw the numbers in the wrong order, my mind raced back to Clara. We had planned this infiltration down to the very last detail. Clara worked in high-level healthcare administration. She knew exactly how poorly secured these private independent clinics usually were. They relied on basic local servers and rarely updated their firewalls. Clara had forged a completely legitimate-looking vendor appointment to perform a routine software update on the clinic's diagnostic imaging machines. The board reception staff had pointed her to an empty administrative office in the back, plugging her directly into the local area network. While I was sitting in this exam room, purposefully failing to count backward from 100, my daughter was moving with lightning speed through the clinic's digital infrastructure. She bypassed their elementary security protocols in minutes. She accessed Dr. Evans' personal and administrative directories. Mitchell's forensic accounting team had told us exactly what to look for. We needed to prove the financial link between Valerie and the doctor. Clara mirrored the network drives and found the smoking gun buried in a folder of encrypted tax documents. She uncovered the massive cash deposits. Valerie had wired $50,000 into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, an account registered to a shell company where Dr. Evans was listed as the primary beneficiary. It was a direct, undeniable, federally prosecutable bribe. Dr. Evans was not diagnosing me. He had been paid $50,000 to legally execute me. Clara silently copied the offshore transfer logs, packed her diagnostic laptop into her vendor bag, and walked out the front doors of the clinic before the office manager even knew the update was finished. She had secured the final nail for their coffins. Back in the examination room, I finished my fake cognitive test. I handed the paper back to the nurse, deliberately making my hand tremble. The nurse gave me a look of genuine pity. She had no idea she was a pawn in a massive criminal conspiracy. She gently guided me back down the hallway to the main office. When I walked back through those mahogany doors, the atmosphere in the room was thick with anticipation. Valerie was sitting rigidly in her chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Dr. Evans was sitting behind his desk, holding the results of my supposed cognitive test. I shuffled back to my seat, playing the exhausted, terrified old man perfectly. Dr. Evans folded his hands together and put on a mask of deep, solemn sorrow. He looked at Valerie and let out a heavy, theatrical sigh. He stated that the results of the evaluation, combined with the severe symptoms Valerie had reported and my ongoing lethargy, were absolutely conclusive. He looked me dead in the eye and delivered a speech he had been paid $50,000 to give. He stated that I was suffering from rapid advanced cognitive decline consistent with severe early-onset Alzheimer's disease. He claimed that the structural integrity of my brain was deteriorating at an alarming rate. He told my wife that my condition had declined far past the point of independent reasoning, and that leaving me to manage my own affairs was a danger to myself and my family. Valerie let out a loud, dramatic weeping sob. She covered her face with her hands, putting on a spectacular show of heartbreak. She thanked the doctor for his honesty, claiming she had been so terribly afraid of this exact outcome. Then Dr. Evans opened his desk drawer. He pulled out a thick, heavy legal document. It was a formal medical affidavit of incompetence. This single piece of paper was the weapon Valerie needed to activate her emergency power of attorney. This was the document that would allow her to legally liquidate my $12 million estate, drain my pension, and discard me in a state-run nursing facility. Dr. Evans pulled a gold fountain pen from his breast pocket. He smoothed out the affidavit on his glass desk. Without a single moment of hesitation, without a shred of moral conscience, he signed his name on the dotted line. He signed away my mind, my freedom, and my 40 years of hard labor, all for a stack of stolen cash. He handed the signed affidavit to Valerie. As her fingers closed around the thick paper, her tearful facade slipped for just a fraction of a second. Her green eyes flashed with pure, unadulterated triumph. She believed she had finally won. She had the key to my empire securely in her grasp. Dr. Evans looked at me with fake, sickening pity. He told me that everything was going to be all right. He promised me that my devoted wife would handle all my heavy burdens from now on, and that I could finally just rest. The blood in my veins was boiling so hot I could literally feel the heat radiating in my chest. A violent, primal urge screamed at me to reach across that mahogany desk, grab him by the collar of his pristine white coat, and drag him across the shattered glass. I wanted to destroy the room. I wanted to show them exactly how much strength an old diesel mechanic still had left in his bones. But I contained the explosion. I kept my vacant, lost smile perfectly fixed on my face. I looked the corrupt doctor dead in the eye. I made my voice weak, frail, and trembling with manufactured gratitude. "Thank you, doctor," I whispered, staring right through his deceitful soul. "I appreciate everything you are doing to take care of me." I reached up and gently patted my chest, letting my fingers brush against the small silver tie clip. The microphone was silently running, recording every single lie, every fake tear, and the scratching sound of the gold pen signing the fraudulent affidavit. The trap was fully built. The predators were standing right in the center of the kill zone. They thought they were dragging me to the slaughterhouse, completely unaware that I had just locked the doors behind them. The sky outside was darkening into a deep, bruised purple by the time Valerie pulled her luxury crossover back into our driveway. We had just left the concierge clinic, and the fraudulent medical affidavit signed by that corrupt physician was sitting right there in her expensive leather handbag. The drive home had been suffocatingly quiet. I sat in the passenger seat with my shoulders hunched, playing the part of a man whose mind was slowly slipping away into the fog. I stared out the window at the passing trees, letting my jaw hang slightly slack. Inside my chest, however, my heart was beating with the steady, relentless rhythm of a heavy diesel engine pushing a rig up a steep mountain grade. When we walked through the front door, Valerie immediately shifted into her role as the ultimate devoted caregiver. She guided me by the arm with exaggerated gentleness, as if my bones were made of fragile glass. She led me into the living room and settled me into my favorite leather recliner. She draped a thick woven blanket over my knees and told me to just relax while she prepared a nice warm dinner. I sat in the quiet living room listening to the clinking of pots and pans in the kitchen. I let my eyes wander around the house I had paid for with 4 decades of sweat and grease. I thought about all the years I spent underneath massive commercial trucks, busting my knuckles open to make sure Clara had clothes for school and a warm bed to sleep in. Every piece of molding, every hardwood plank, every piece of furniture in this house was paid for by honest, brutal labor. And the woman, humming a cheerful tune in the kitchen, believed she was going to steal it all before the sun came up tomorrow. After we ate a quiet dinner, Valerie cleared the plates. She wiped down the marble island and then disappeared into her home office for a few minutes. When she returned, her hands were full. She was carrying a thick stack of crisp white legal documents neatly organized in a manila folder. She pulled up a chair and sat directly facing me, pulling her knees close to mine. Her green eyes were wide and filled with a manufactured, profound sadness. "Harrison, sweetheart," she began, her voice soft and trembling with fake emotion. "We need to talk about what Dr. Evans told us today. I know it is scary. I know you feel confused. But I promised you on our wedding day that I would always take care of you in sickness and in health." I looked at the stack of papers in her lap. I forced my hands to shake a little as I gripped the armrests of my recliner. I swallowed hard, acting like a man who was terrified of his own fading memory. "What are those papers, Valerie?" I asked, my voice coming out as a raspy whisper. "Are they from the doctor? Are they going to put me in a home?" "Oh no, honey," she cooed, reaching out to stroke my weathered cheek. "I would never let anyone put you in a home. That is exactly why I had our estate attorney draft these documents. You have worked so hard your entire life, Harrison. You built a beautiful legacy. But with your memory slipping, we have to make sure your assets are protected. We have to make sure Clara does not try to take advantage of your condition and lock you away in some cheap state facility just to get her hands on your money." The sheer audacity of her lies made the blood roar in my ears. She was using my daughter, the one person in this world who actually loved me unconditionally, as a boogeyman to scare me into compliance. I nodded slowly, playing the naive, confused husband perfectly. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. Valerie smiled, a tight, comforting smile that masked the absolute greed burning in her soul. She set the stack of papers on the small wooden coffee table between us. "These are just some standard legal protections," she explained, pointing to the thickest document on top. "This first one is a durable power of attorney. It just means that if you have a bad day and cannot remember how to pay the bills or handle your investments, I can legally do it for you. It gives me the authority to manage your accounts, so you never have to stress about numbers again." She peeled the first document back to reveal the second stack. "And these are immediate asset transfer deeds." She continued, her voice remaining smooth and casual, as if she were talking about a grocery list. "Because your commercial pension and your heavy investment portfolios are still in your name alone, they are vulnerable if you become medically incapacitated. By signing these transfer deeds, we are moving everything into a joint holding account that I can manage. It secures your $12 million, sweetheart. It keeps it perfectly safe." I stared at the paperwork. The legal jargon was dense and complex, but the purpose was crystal clear. She was asking me to sign away my entire empire. She was asking me to hand over $12 million in liquid assets, property deeds, and pension rights. If these had been my real accounts, signing these papers would have been financial suicide. But she did not know that Clara and Mitchell had already executed the Phantom Trust. She did not know that the $12 million she thought she was transferring was nothing but a digital ghost, a highly restricted decoy account monitored by federal banking authorities. I let a heavy silence hang in the room. I looked at the papers, and then I looked at Valerie. I made my eyes water slightly. "I just want to be safe, Valerie," I whispered. "I just do not want to be a burden to anyone." "You are not a burden, Harrison," she replied softly, pressing a pen into my shaking hand. "You are my husband. Just sign on the yellow tabs, and I will handle the rest. I will handle everything." I looked down at the pen she had placed in my palm. It was a standard black ballpoint pen. I let it slip through my trembling fingers, dropping it onto the floor. I apologized profusely, acting completely embarrassed by my lack of coordination. Valerie sighed softly, leaning over to pick it up. Before she could hand it back to me, I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a sleek blue fountain pen. "It is okay," I muttered, pulling the cap off the blue pen. "I have my own right here. I always keep my lucky pen in my jacket." Valerie did not argue. She just pointed to the signature line on the durable power of attorney. She did not know that the blue fountain pen in my hand had been given to me by Mitchell just 2 days ago. It was not a standard writing instrument. It was a high-level legal security tool. The deep blue ink inside the cartridge contained a proprietary chemical signature. It was a highly specific, traceable forensic ink designed for high-stakes corporate fraud investigations. Mitchell had explained it to me very clearly in his office. When a fraudster challenges a signature in federal court, they often claim the victim signed willingly and without coercion. But this specific forensic ink contained chemical timestamps and pressure-sensitive tracking compounds. If Valerie ever tried to claim these documents were legally binding in a court of law, a federal forensic analyst could prove exactly when the ink was laid down and perfectly document the erratic, trembling pressure of my signature, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was under extreme psychological duress and heavily medicated at the time of signing. I pressed the nib of the forensic pen to the heavy paper. I let my hand shake violently as I formed the letters of my name, Harrison Caldwell. I signed the durable power of attorney. I flipped the page and signed the medical proxy forms. I moved to the immediate asset transfer deeds. Page after page, signature after signature, I legally handed over the phantom keys to my entire life. Every scratch of the pen on the paper felt like a victory bell ringing in my mind. I thought about the days I spent building my fleet maintenance company from the ground up. I thought about the first heavy diesel engine I ever rebuilt by myself, the grease under my fingernails, the smell of exhaust, the absolute pride of creating something real and lasting. I was not signing away that legacy. I was signing the arrest warrants for the people trying to steal it. When I reached the final page, I let out a long, exhausted breath and let the pen drop onto the table. I leaned my head back against the leather recliner, closing my eyes. "Is that all of it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Valerie quickly gathered the massive stack of signed documents. She tapped the edges against the table to straighten them, her movements sharp and eager. She could not completely hide the frantic excitement vibrating through her body. The mask of the grieving, worried wife was slipping away, revealing the cold, calculating predator underneath. "That is all of it, sweetheart," she said, standing up, holding the documents tightly against her chest. "You did perfectly." She leaned down and pressed a kiss against my forehead. Her lips felt like ice against my skin. "You can finally rest now, Harrison," she whispered. "You do not have to worry about a single thing ever again. I am taking complete control." She turned and walked quickly out of the living room, heading straight for her home office down the hall. I kept my eyes closed, keeping my breathing slow and steady. I reached up and subtly tapped the silver tie clip fastened to my shirt collar, making sure the micro-recording device was still active. I waited a few moments before I slowly pushed myself up from the recliner. I walked with silent, measured steps down the carpeted hallway, stopping just outside the partially open door of her office. The heavy machinery mechanic inside me was wide awake, listening to the gears of her criminal engine spinning out of control. I heard the distinct mechanical whirring of her expensive scanner and printer pulling the legal documents through the feeder. She was digitizing the signed paperwork. Then I heard the sound of her cell phone dialing. She put the phone on speaker and set it on her desk. The call connected after 2 rings. Jared's voice came through the speaker, sounding tense and anxious. "Tell me you got it, Val. Tell me the old fool actually signed the papers." I heard Valerie let out a sharp, victorious laugh. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated malice. "I got every single signature," she said, the sound of the scanner humming in the background. "Dr. Evans played his part perfectly this morning. The dementia affidavit is signed and sealed. And Harrison just sat in his chair and signed the irrevocable transfer deeds with his shaking little hands. He actually thanked me for keeping him safe from his daughter. He has no idea what just hit him." Jared let out a loud whoop of excitement on the other end of the line. "I told you we could pull this off!" he shouted. "I told you this mechanic was the perfect mark, so what is the next step? My guys in Atlantic City are breathing down my neck. I need that payout right now." Valerie's voice dropped into a brisk, professional tone. "I am scanning the transfer deeds and the power of attorney right now," she said. "I already have his main investment portal open on my computer. I am going to submit the signed documents digitally to the primary brokerage firm and the pension administrators. As soon as the system verifies the power of attorney, I am authorizing an immediate electronic wire transfer." "How much are we moving today?" Jared asked, his voice thick with greed. "All of it," Valerie replied. "I am initiating a blanket wire transfer of all $12 million into the offshore shell accounts. By the time the banks open for regular business on Monday morning, Harrison Caldwell's entire net worth will be sitting in the Cayman Islands, and we will be on a private flight out of the country." I stood in the dark hallway listening to the sound of her computer keyboard clicking. Each keystroke was a deliberate action. She was uploading the documents. She was entering the account numbers. She was typing in the exact routing codes to drain the phantom accounts Mitchell had set up. "All right," Valerie said, her voice filled with absolute triumph. "The documents are uploaded. The wire transfer request is populated. $12 million ready to move." "Hit the button," Val Jarrett urged through the speakerphone. "Hit the button and let us be done with this miserable town." I heard the heavy, definitive click of the enter key being pressed. "There," she said. "The transfer request has been submitted." I stood in the shadows and let a genuine, slow smile spread across my face. Valerie thought she had just initiated the final phase of her grand master plan. She believed she had just stolen my life's work. She had absolutely no idea what hitting that enter key actually meant. Mitchell had explained the mechanism of the Phantom Trust with absolute clarity. By logging into a digital banking portal across state lines, submitting fraudulently obtained legal documents, and pressing a button to initiate a multi-million-dollar unauthorized electronic transfer, Valerie had just crossed the ultimate legal threshold. She had just committed federal wire fraud. She had just committed federal mail fraud by transmitting the digitized documents across secure financial networks. The dummy accounts she had just targeted were directly monitored by federal banking authorities and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. The system was designed as a tripwire. The moment she requested that transfer, the massive alarms in the federal banking security grid began to ring. The money was not going anywhere. The $12 million was sitting safely in the irrevocable trust controlled by Clara and myself. Valerie had just submitted a documented, time-stamped request to steal $12 million that did not exist, using a forged medical document and an extorted signature written in traceable forensic ink. She had built a mountain of irrefutable criminal evidence and delivered it directly into the hands of the federal government. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had crushed her completely. I turned away from the office door and walked silently up the stairs to the master bedroom. My heart was light. My mind was clear. The exhaustion and the fear that had plagued me for the last 6 months were completely gone. I took off my jacket, carefully removed the silver tie clip, and placed it securely in my pocket. The recording had captured her full confession and the exact moment she executed the federal crime. I lay down on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. Downstairs, Valerie was celebrating her imaginary victory. She was packing her bags, dreaming of offshore beaches and stolen millions. She thought she was a predator who had successfully hunted a weak, defenseless old man. But she was about to learn a very hard lesson about heavy machinery. When you try to dismantle an engine without understanding how the gears actually work, you are the one who gets caught in the grinding teeth. And tomorrow morning, the federal authorities were going to tear her world down to the absolute bare metal. Saturday morning arrived with a clear, bright sky. It was the day of our 5th wedding anniversary. Valerie had planned this lavish gala at the Oak Creek Country Club for months. She used my money to pay for the expensive floral arrangements, the premium catering, and the classical string quartet. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the master bedroom, buttoning my crisp white shirt and adjusting my black bow tie. I looked at the man in the glass. For 6 brutal months, I had allowed my shoulders to slump forward. I had allowed my eyes to look vacant and my hands to tremble like leaves in the wind. I had played the part of a broken machine ready to be hauled to the scrapyard. But today was different. Today, underneath the tailored fabric of my tuxedo, my heart was beating with the steady, powerful rhythm of a massive diesel engine. I slipped the silver tie clip onto my shirt collar. Mitchell, the lawyer, had replaced the battery and downloaded the previous audio recordings. Today, the clip was recording the final act of this absolute nightmare. Valerie walked into the bedroom wearing an emerald green evening gown that cost more than the first tow truck I ever owned. She looked radiant and entirely victorious. She walked up behind me and smoothed the shoulders of my jacket. She told me how handsome I looked and reminded me to just smile and let her do all the talking tonight. She said it was going to be a wonderful evening to celebrate our deep love. I nodded slowly, giving her that same empty, compliant smile she had come to expect. I told her I was just happy to be by her side. The lie tasted like battery acid on my tongue, but I swallowed it down. We walked out to her car and she drove us toward the country club. The sky was clear and the sun was setting, casting a golden light over the city. I thought about Clara sitting in Mitchell's office right now, coordinating with the federal agents who were actively reviewing the wire fraud alerts Valerie had triggered the night before. The trap was locked. The steel jaws were shut tight. Valerie just did not know it yet. We arrived at the Oak Creek Country Club. The valet opened my door and Valerie immediately took my arm, clinging to me with a fierce protective grip. We walked into the grand ballroom and the sheer scale of her arrogance hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The room was decorated with crystal chandeliers and massive centerpieces of white roses. Waiters in pristine uniforms walked around carrying silver trays of expensive champagne. She had invited over 100 guests to witness her final triumph. I saw my old business partners, the men I had built my fleet maintenance company with, standing near the wooden bar. I saw the deacons and elders from our local church, and then I saw them, the 2 accomplices. Jared was standing near a carved ice sculpture wearing a sharp gray suit and holding a glass of expensive bourbon. He looked like a man who had just won the state lottery. He caught Valerie's eye across the room and gave her a subtle, smug nod. A few tables over, sitting with the local elite, was Dr. Evans. The corrupt physician was sipping red wine and laughing, completely oblivious to the fact that his medical license and his freedom were about to be permanently revoked. Valerie paraded me around the room like a prized hunting trophy. She introduced me to guests using a soft, pitying voice. She told everyone how tired I was and how my memory was just not what it used to be. I played along perfectly. I shook hands with my old friends and intentionally forgot their names. I stuttered when I spoke to my former business partner, Tom. I watched the profound heartbreak in Tom's eyes as he looked at the man who used to tear down heavy commercial transmissions with bare hands, now acting like a confused, frightened child. Valerie ate up their sympathy. She absorbed their comforting pats on her shoulder like a dry sponge. She whispered to them about how hard it was to watch me decline, but how she was deeply committed to managing my affairs and keeping me comfortable at home for as long as possible. Every single word she spoke was a calculated piece of her master narrative. She was building a public consensus. She wanted every influential person in our community to witness my supposed dementia so that when she finalized the transfer of my $12 million estate, nobody would question it. Nobody would suspect any foul play because they had all seen the poor old mechanic losing his mind at the anniversary gala. Dinner was served shortly after our arrival. We sat at the center table right in front of the small elevated stage. Valerie ordered a plate of soft food for me and actually reached over with her knife and fork to cut my roasted chicken into small, bite-sized pieces. The absolute humiliation of sitting there while the woman who was trying to destroy me treated me like an infant made my jaw clench tight. I looked down at my porcelain plate, focusing all my internal energy on breathing. In and out. Intake and exhaust. Control the pressure. Do not blow the seal before it is time. I ate slowly, dropping my fork once onto the carpet to sell the performance. Jared was sitting 2 tables away, grinning at me while he chewed his steak. Dr. Evans was chatting happily with a local politician. They were all so incredibly confident. They thought the old diesel mechanic was completely stripped of his gears. They thought I was a hollow, rusting shell. They did not know about the Phantom Trust. They did not know about the federal wire fraud alerts. They did not know the legal documents Valerie had scanned and submitted the night before were completely worthless. As the dinner plates were cleared by the waitstaff, the classical string quartet stopped playing. The ballroom filled with the low hum of polite conversation. Valerie wiped her mouth with a white linen napkin and gave me a soft kiss on the cheek. She told me she loved me. Then she stood up from her chair. The sharp clinking of a silver spoon against a crystal champagne glass echoed loudly through the grand ballroom. The conversation slowly died down and all eyes turned toward our center table. Valerie smoothed the fabric of her emerald dress and walked gracefully up the short carpeted steps to the stage. She stood behind the microphone, bathed in the warm, bright glow of the overhead spotlight. She looked like a caring angel, but I knew the absolute devil was wearing her skin. I shifted in my chair, planting my heavy boots firmly on the floor. My feet felt grounded. The manufactured weakness in my legs was gone. The fake tremors in my hands stopped completely. I sat perfectly still, waiting for her to deliver her lines. Valerie grabbed the microphone and looked out over the quiet crowd. Her eyes glistened with perfectly timed artificial tears. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice echoing softly across the large room. 5 years ago, I married the most wonderful, strong, and brilliant man I have ever known. Harrison Caldwell built a magnificent empire from scrap metal and hard work. He provided for his community, and he gave me a life full of unconditional love. She paused, taking a shaky, dramatic breath and wiping a single tear from her cheek. The crowd was completely silent, captivated by her flawless performance. But as many of you know, the last few months have brought us an incredibly difficult challenge. She continued, looking down at me with deep sorrow. Harrison has been battling a severe and rapid cognitive decline. The man who used to fix massive fleet engines is now struggling to remember the beautiful memories we have made. The doctors have informed us that his condition is permanent and highly progressive. A low murmur of sympathy rippled through the elegant ballroom. I saw my old friends shaking their heads in genuine sorrow. I saw Dr. Evans nodding gravely, confirming her lies with his professional medical presence. I saw Jared trying to hide his greedy smile behind his bourbon glass. Valerie gripped the microphone stand, acting as though she were holding herself up through sheer emotional willpower. Because of this tragic diagnosis, Harrison is officially retiring from all public and financial life, she announced, her voice breaking perfectly. It breaks my heart, but it is my duty as his devoted wife to step up and carry his heavy burdens. As of yesterday, Harrison has legally transferred the full management of his estate and his assets into my care. I will be taking over all of his financial responsibilities so that he can simply rest in peace. I promise all of you, and I promise my sweet husband, that I will protect everything he built. I will carry his legacy forward. Please raise your glasses to Harrison. The crowd raised their glasses into the air. A polite, sorrowful applause filled the room. Valerie looked down at me from the stage, her green eyes flashing with that same wicked, triumphant spark I had seen when the corrupt doctor signed the false affidavit. She thought this was the end of the story. She thought she had successfully poured the concrete over my grave. She thought she had isolated me, stripped me of my wealth, and secured her future on my dime. But she made one fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. She forgot that I am a man who spent 40 years breaking seized bolts and tearing down solid steel walls. She forgot that a mechanic knows exactly how to take a broken machine apart piece by piece. The applause slowly faded into silence. Valerie stepped back from the microphone, waiting for me to give a weak, pathetic wave to the crowd. She expected me to sit there and accept my absolute public defeat. She expected the broken old man to smile and nod. Instead, I placed my large, calloused hands on the edge of the dining table. I did not shake. I did not hesitate. I pushed my chair back and the wooden legs scraped loudly against the floor, cutting sharply through the quiet room. I stood up. I did not slump my shoulders. I did not bend my neck. I stood at my full, towering height, pulling my spine perfectly straight. The fake frailty fell away from my body like a heavy, rusted chain snapping into 1,000 pieces. I took a deep breath of the cool, conditioned air, letting my broad chest expand fully. The diesel mechanic who had built a multi-million-dollar company out of nothing but grit and grease was finally back. I stepped away from the table. My boots hit the hardwood floor with a heavy, deliberate, and powerful rhythm. The entire ballroom watched me in absolute stunned silence. The murmurs of pity vanished completely. My old business partners narrowed their eyes, recognizing the heavy, confident stride of the man they used to know. Jared lowered his bourbon glass, his smug smile freezing completely on his face. Dr. Evans sat up straight, looking confused and suddenly very nervous. I walked past their tables, my gaze fixed entirely on Valerie. The triumphant spark in her green eyes flickered and died, replaced by a sudden creeping terror. She gripped the microphone stand, her knuckles turning white. She could see that the man walking toward her was not a dementia patient. I walked up the short steps to the stage. I did not stumble. I moved with the precision and power of a machine running at absolute peak performance. I stepped right up to Valerie. The smell of her expensive lavender perfume made my stomach turn, but I did not flinch. I reached out and gently but firmly took the microphone from her trembling hand. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, unable to comprehend the massive transformation happening right in front of her. I turned my back to my treacherous wife and faced the crowd of 100 silent guests. I looked at the corrupt doctor. I looked at the greedy fake brother. I looked at the faces of my true friends. I adjusted the silver tie clip on my collar, ensuring the recording device was perfectly positioned. The trap was fully set, the doors were locked, and it was finally time to drop the hammer. I stood on that elevated stage, holding the cold metal microphone in my heavily calloused hands. The grand ballroom of the Oak Creek Country Club was completely silent. 100 wealthy guests, including my oldest friends and my most treacherous enemies, stared up at me, expecting to hear the confused, rambling mumblings of a broken man. Valerie stood just 2 steps behind me, breathing heavily in her expensive emerald green gown. She was waiting for me to validate her tragic performance. She wanted me to cement the lie that would secure her $12 million payout. I looked out over the crowd. I found Tom, my old business partner, sitting at the front table with his hands folded tight across his lap. His face was etched with genuine sorrow. I looked at Dr. Evans, swirling his red wine with a smug, comfortable grin. He felt completely invincible. I looked at Jared, leaning against a carved ice sculpture, looking like a man who had already spent a fortune he did not own. Then I brought the microphone to my lips. My voice did not shake. It did not waver in the slightest. It boomed through the high-fidelity speakers with a crisp, commanding clarity that I had suppressed for 6 agonizing months. I thanked everyone for coming to celebrate our anniversary. I told them that my wife had painted a very compelling picture of my health tonight. I said she had gone to great lengths to convince everyone in this room that my mind was rotting away and that I was completely incapable of managing my own life. A low murmur of confusion rippled through the audience. Tom sat up straight in his chair, his eyes widening as he recognized the strong, steady cadence of the man he used to work beside. I turned my head slightly and looked right at Valerie. The color had completely drained from her beautiful face. She looked like a ghost, trapped in the harsh glare of the spotlight. She took a step toward me, reaching out her hand to grab my arm and stop me. I stepped away from her, keeping my posture rigid and broad. The frail, trembling old man she thought she owned was entirely gone. I told the crowd that the truth was actually much more interesting than a simple medical diagnosis. I raised my left hand and looked toward the back of the massive ballroom. Up in the darkened sound booth overlooking the gala, I saw a single light click on. My beautiful, fierce daughter Clara was sitting behind the primary control board. She had bypassed the country club security an hour before the party started using her corporate credentials. She gave me a single firm nod through the glass window. I lowered my hand. the heavy velvet curtains behind me automatically parted. A massive, motorized projector screen descended from the ceiling, rolling down with a smooth, mechanical hum. The ambient lights in the ballroom dimmed instantly, plunging the tables into shadows and focusing all attention on the bright white screen. Valerie let out a sharp gasp behind me. She tried to step in front of the projector beam, but it was too late. Clara hit the first button on her control deck. The screen did not show a romantic slideshow of our 5-year marriage. It did not show pictures of our vacations or our lovely home. Instead, 4 massive high-resolution images flashed onto the screen for every single guest to see. They were the 4 fake passports I had photographed inside the hidden wall safe of Valerie. The images were blown up to 10 feet tall. Every detail was crystal clear. The crowd gasped in pure shock. They saw the smiling face of Valerie printed next to 4 completely different names. They saw the fraudulent identification numbers and the foreign offshore banking stamps perfectly visible on the massive screen. I spoke into the microphone, my voice echoing over the rising panic in the room. I introduced my loving wife not as Valerie Caldwell, but by her 4 active criminal aliases. I explained to my friends and colleagues that the woman standing behind me was a professional predator who targeted older men, isolated them from their families, and systematically dismantled their entire lives for profit. Valerie screamed my name. She lunged forward, trying to snatch the microphone out of my grip, but I easily blocked her with my forearm. I was a master diesel mechanic, and my physical strength had never left me. I told her to stand back and watch the rest of the show. Clara pressed the second button on her console. The room literally shook as a crystal-clear, high-definition audio recording blared through the massive surround sound speakers. It was the exact recording I had captured with the silver tie clip just days earlier. The voices of Valerie and Jared echoed off the crystal chandeliers, filling every single corner of the country club. Everyone in the room heard Jared complaining about his illegal gambling debts in Atlantic City. Everyone heard his aggressive, impatient voice demanding the buyout money and complaining about pretending to care for me. The ballroom erupted into shocked, outraged shouts. I looked over at the ice sculpture. Jared had dropped his expensive bourbon glass. It shattered against the polished marble floor, splashing amber liquid everywhere. He looked like a trapped rat scanning the room for an exit. His face was pale and slick with sudden sweat. Then the audio recording reached its climax. The cold, calculating voice of Valerie filled the room. The guests listened in absolute horror as the recorded Valerie bragged about wiring stolen commercial pension funds across state lines to pay off mob bookies. They heard her boast about slipping heavy sedatives into my morning coffee to fake my cognitive decline. Women in the audience covered their mouths in disbelief. Men shouted in pure outrage. The recorded voice continued laying out the final master plan. Valerie bragged about having Dr. Evans completely in her pocket. She detailed exactly how he was going to sign a fraudulent dementia affidavit so she could trigger the emergency power of attorney, lock me in a state facility, and flee the country with $12 million. The moment the name of the doctor echoed through the speakers, the projector screen changed again. Clara brought up the heavily encrypted offshore bank statements she had extracted from the clinic network. The screen illuminated the darkroom with a massive display of a $50,000 wire transfer. The document clearly showed the money moving from one of the shell companies belonging to Valerie directly into a private Cayman Islands account registered to Dr. Evans. I looked down at the table where the doctor was sitting. His arrogant professional mask had completely dissolved into pure, unadulterated terror. He was sweating profusely, his face a pale, sickly shade of gray. He tried to stand up his chair, tipping over backward with a loud crash. He stammered frantically, trying to tell the local politician next to him that the documents were forged and that it was all a terrible misunderstanding. But the politician just stared at him with absolute disgust and backed away. My old partner Tom stood up, pointing an angry finger at the stage, demanding someone call the authorities immediately. I held up my hand and spoke into the microphone once more. I told Tom and the rest of the guests that there was no need to call anyone. Mitchell, my high-stakes financial fraud attorney, had already taken care of all the necessary arrangements. I explained to the crowd that the fraudulent transfer deeds Valerie had submitted the night before had not moved a single penny of my actual wealth. They had simply triggered a massive federal wire fraud alert linked directly to a restricted dummy account. The trap was already completely closed and the authorities were already here. Right on cue, the heavy double doors at the main entrance of the ballroom burst open. The sheer force of the entry made the floral arrangements shake. A dozen federal agents wearing dark tactical gear poured into the country club. Their boots stomped against the marble floors, drowning out the frantic murmurs of the crowd. Mitchell strode in right behind them, looking like a general surveying a conquered battlefield. He pointed directly at the stage and then toward the ice sculpture. Jared panicked. He spun around and tried to sprint toward the catering kitchen in the back of the room. He did not make it 10 feet. 2 massive federal agents tackled him to the floor, knocking a tray of champagne glasses out of the hands of a waiter. Glass shattered everywhere as they pinned the arms of Jared behind his back and locked heavy steel cuffs around his wrists. He screamed and cursed, but the agents ignored him entirely, hauling him to his feet. Dr. Evans did not even try to run. He just stood by his overturned chair, weeping openly as an agent read him his rights and pulled his arms behind his back. The esteemed medical professional was going to spend the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary for taking a $50,000 bribe to destroy the life of a man. The room was absolute chaos. Guests were shouting, pulling out their phones, and moving out of the way of the federal raid. Clara emerged from the sound booth and walked down the stairs, standing beside Mitchell with a fierce, proud smile on her face. My daughter had helped me dismantle an entire criminal syndicate, and she looked absolutely magnificent doing it. I turned around to face Valerie. The beautiful emerald gown she wore now looked completely ridiculous against the backdrop of her absolute ruin. She was hyperventilating, gasping for air as if the room had suddenly lost all its oxygen. Her chest heaved and tears streamed down her perfectly contoured face, ruining her expensive makeup. She fell to her knees on the stage, grabbing the fabric of my trousers with shaking hands. She tried to play the victim one last time, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes, begging me to help her, claiming it was all a huge mistake and that she truly loved me. She pleaded with me to tell the agents to stop. 2 federal agents marched up the stage steps, flanking her on both sides. I looked down at the woman who had shared my bed and tried to steal my mind. My expression was completely devoid of sympathy. I felt the deep, steady calm of a mechanic wiping the grease off his hands after a long, brutal job well done. I did not feel sorrow, and I did not feel pity. I felt the righteous satisfaction of a man who had protected his family and secured his legacy against true evil. I looked her dead in the eye, my voice low, steady, and carrying the weight of 40 years of hard labor. "You thought I was just an old engine you could strip for parts," I said slowly, ensuring she heard every single word over the chaos of the room. "But you forgot something important, Valerie. I am the one who knows how to tear things down to the studs." The days immediately following the anniversary gala were a whirlwind of absolute legal destruction. The federal authorities moved with a swift and brutal efficiency that left no room for escape. When the federal agents hauled Valerie and Jared out of that opulent country club ballroom, they did not just arrest them. They completely dismantled the fraudulent syndicate they had spent years carefully building. I sat in the federal courtroom weeks later wearing my best suit, sitting right next to my daughter Clara and my brilliant attorney Mitchell. I watched the wheels of actual justice grind forward with heavy, unstoppable momentum. Valerie sat at the defense table looking absolutely pale and terrified. The expensive designer clothes and the perfect hair were gone. She looked like exactly what she was, a desperate criminal who had finally been caught in her own trap. The federal prosecutors were utterly relentless. Because Clara had secured the digital files from the medical clinic network, and because my silver tie clip had captured crystal clear audio of their entire conspiracy, the defense attorneys had absolutely nothing to stand on. The evidence was irrefutable. They played the audio recordings in open court. Everyone heard Valerie bragging about skimming my commercial pension funds to pay off illegal mob gambling debts across state lines. Everyone heard her laughing about slipping heavy chemical sedatives into my morning coffee to manufacture a fake dementia diagnosis. The jury listened in absolute stunned silence as the sheer magnitude of her cruelty echoed through the room. The judge handed down the sentences with a cold, righteous fury. Valerie and Jared were officially indicted and convicted on massive federal charges. They were hit with violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act for operating an organized criminal syndicate. They were convicted of severe elder abuse, federal wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit medical fraud. The judge looked down from his bench and told Valerie that she was one of the most calculated and heartless predators he had ever seen in his 30 years on the bench. He sentenced both Valerie and Jared to 20 years each in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. They will spend the rest of their natural lives locked in a concrete cell, stripped of the freedom and the wealth they tried so desperately to steal from innocent people. Dr. Evans faced his own brutal reckoning. The medical board permanently stripped him of his license to practice medicine the very next morning. The federal prosecutors indicted him for accepting the $50,000 offshore bribe to falsify my medical records. He lost his lucrative practice, he lost his pristine reputation, and he was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The corrupt system they relied on to steal my $12 million empire was completely incinerated. The house of cards had completely collapsed, leaving them buried underneath the rubble. Through it all, my life work remained completely untouched. The phantom trust Mitchell had designed worked flawlessly. While Valerie was sitting in a holding cell panicking over frozen decoy accounts, my actual $12 million net worth was sitting safely in the irrevocable trust controlled entirely by Clara and myself. Not a single penny of my pension or my business buyout money was lost. I had protected my legacy and secured my daughter's future. But I knew I could not stay in that house. The beautiful home I had paid for with 4 decades of sweat and grease was permanently tainted. Every time I walked into the kitchen, I saw Valerie grinding sedatives into my coffee. Every time I looked at the hallway mirror, I thought about the hidden wall safe and the fake passports. I needed a fresh start. I needed a place where the air felt clean and the memories were not poisoned by betrayal. I put the house on the market and sold it within a month. I used a small portion of my protected wealth to purchase a massive, beautiful piece of property far out in the quiet countryside. It is a sprawling estate with giant oak trees, a winding gravel driveway, and a beautiful wraparound porch where you can sit and watch the sun rise over the green hills. But the best part of the property is the massive steel workshop sitting right behind the main house. It is twice the size of my old garage. I filled it with the best heavy machinery lifts, the finest tools, and the smell of raw motor oil and fresh-cut sawdust. It is my sanctuary. It is a place where broken things are fixed and where solid steel is molded back into shape. The greatest joy of my new life is that I do not live in that big, beautiful house alone. Clara and my grandson Tommy moved in with me. We merged our lives back together, erasing the terrible 8 months of forced estrangement that Valerie had orchestrated. Waking up every morning and hearing the sound of my grandson's laughter echoing down the hallway is a blessing I cannot even put into proper words. I get to cook breakfast for them. I get to drive Tommy to school in my restored vintage pickup truck. I get to sit on the porch with Clara in the evenings drinking iced tea and talking about our days. The heavy, agonizing silence that almost destroyed my soul is completely gone, replaced by the warm, vibrant noise of a real loving family. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, I stood in my massive steel workshop, wiping the grease off my calloused hands with a clean red rag. The large bay doors were rolled open, letting in the cool autumn breeze. I looked over toward the large wooden workbench in the corner. My grandson Tommy was standing on a sturdy wooden stool wearing a pair of thick safety goggles and holding a small metal hammer. I had given him a handful of nails and a thick piece of scrap pine wood. He was entirely focused on his task, his small face scrunched up in deep concentration. He swung the little hammer, hitting the nail with a clumsy but determined strike. I walked over and stood beside him, placing my large, weathered hand over his small one. I guided his grip, adjusting his angle. I told him that building something strong takes patience and the right kind of focus. You have to hit the nail straight on, and you have to trust the tools you are holding in your hands. Tommy smiled up at me, his eyes shining with pure admiration and joy. He nodded and swung the hammer again, this time driving the nail perfectly flush into the wood. Watching him, I realized something profound about the journey I had just survived. For a long time, I believed that providing financially for my family was the only thing that mattered. I thought that working 40 years, breaking my back to build a multi-million-dollar empire was the ultimate expression of love. But I learned the hard way that wealth can attract the darkest kinds of evil. Valerie saw my money, and she saw my desire for companionship, and she turned those things into a weapon. She thought my love was a weakness. She thought my aging body made me an easy target. She believed she could isolate me, poison me, and strip me down for parts like an abandoned vehicle in a junkyard. But she fundamentally misunderstood the nature of a man who builds things for a living. I survived because I refused to let my love become a fatal weakness. I survived because I remembered who I was. I am a master diesel mechanic. I know how to listen to an engine and diagnose the exact point of failure. I know how to systematically map out a problem, and I know how to tear a machine apart piece by piece until the rod is exposed. I did not let my anger blind me. I used it as fuel. I worked with Clara, and we built an inescapable trap of our own. Family is not just the people who smile at you across a dinner table, or the people who claim to love you while secretly plotting your ruin. True family is the people who stand by you when the foundation cracks. Clara fought for me when I was too poisoned to fight for myself. She saw the truth when everyone else was blinded by the lies. We rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of absolute truth and unconditional loyalty. Trust is not something you give away simply because someone wears a wedding ring. Trust is something that must be earned, proven, and protected every single day. I look around my beautiful new home, I look at my brave daughter and my wonderful grandson, and I know that I have finally built something that no predator can ever steal. I have built a fortress of real love and absolute peace. I want to speak directly to everyone listening to my voice right now. My story is a warning and a harsh lesson about the realities of this world. You must always protect the things you have worked your entire life to build. Do not assume that your assets are safe just because you trust the people sleeping in your house. You have to secure your legacy with airtight legal protections, like irrevocable trusts and proper legal counsel. You must keep the lines of communication wide open with your children and your true loved ones. Do not let anyone ever isolate you or convince you that your family does not care about you. If someone is constantly trying to intercept your phone calls or manage your relationships, that is a massive red flag. Most importantly, you must never ignore your own instincts. If you wake up feeling unnaturally tired, if your mind feels foggy, and something in your gut tells you that the situation is wrong, you have to listen to that voice. You have to seek independent outside help immediately. Do not let anyone convince you that you are losing your mind without fighting for the truth. Evil does not always wear a mask in the shadows. Sometimes evil smiles at you, pours your morning coffee, and wears a golden wedding ring. You have to be strong enough to see the truth and brave enough to fight back. Did you like my story? I am so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment below with your current location and what time it is there right now while you are watching this video. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so I can keep bringing you more life stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. See you in the next story with love and respect.